Well, welcome. What a great service already. And it's really fantastic to worship together. And I hope you had a great Turkey Day, otherwise known as Thanksgiving. And I hope that you were able to be really thankful. We have a lot to be grateful for today, don't we? And as the worship singers and the leaders were up here this morning, I was just struck by how profoundly we should be thankful for them. Yeah. Come on, let's give it a round of applause for them. You know, it's been a great time to worship when you get a little teary-eyed sort of in the middle of it, and that's how I was feeling this morning. And thank you so much for leading us all to understand the Lord and our relationship with Him through song and through worship, and so thankful for that. And as Suzanne leaned over to me during the middle of the song, I can only imagine, and mentioned that it reminded her of her good friend Donna Carnes, who passed away this last week. And Dan is here this morning. So excited to see Dan this morning, and so excited to have him here. And that's a special song, special friendship. And we also have some special guests with us this morning. And we have a number of special guests. They've already stood up once, but I'm going to have them stand again. And that's Ron and Linda Brumley right there. And they're here with their family, Mike and Meredith. And now, you know, this last 2 weeks we've had some special guests from the standpoint of Suzanne and I's life. And last week we had Greg and Kathy Morutsky here. And this week, Ron and Linda are here, and I have to say that Ron and Linda have had probably more impact on our parenting and family and marriage life than maybe anybody else. And we're so thankful for you for all the classes and lessons and counsel. And Ron gave me the great advice one time of, if it's not going that great at home, just start a food fight there at the dinner table. So I put that into practice, and my life's never been the same. Really so glad that you guys are here. So excited to have you. You know, we right now are in the middle of a sermon series entitled, and I'll pull it up here, Between the Rock and a Hard Place. And, you know, as Christians, sometimes we feel like we're between a rock and a hard place, and we can feel a little bit like that sheep there, not exactly sure what to do. I understand we're not a sheep, as Greg pointed out last week, but we can feel that, and yet we don't always realize that we're not so much between a rock and a hard place, as much as we are between the rock and a hard place, meaning we have our feet on solid ground, that Jesus is the foundation of what we're doing, and that's what we're here to celebrate. And so we've been going through a sermon series on the book of 1 Peter. The first week, we talked about the Trinity and what it meant to us to be led by the foreknowledge of God the Father, to the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ, and sprinkled with His blood. That's the way that God is leading us forward. Week number 2, we looked at a living hope that was built on Jesus, a guaranteed future protected by God. We have a genuine faith and a great salvation. The next week, we looked at a new life in Christ, where the Bible and Peter gave us the instruction to have hopeful thinking, holy living, and heartfelt loving. I just want to remind you of all these cool lessons we've had. And then last week, Greg led us in a lesson of Jesus Christ, the cornerstone. What an amazing verse that is. Kind of wish I could have preached it, to be honest with you. It says there, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in Him will never be put to shame. By that he means that our life is meant to be built on Jesus. It begins with Jesus, making Him Lord. It continues with Jesus, relying on Him as Savior and Lord. It ends with Jesus as we go to be with Him in glory, that Jesus is the cornerstone. And if we build on that, we will never, ever be put to shame. We can try to build our lives on many things. We can try to build it on relationships. But relationships do come and go. That's the truth. We can try to build it on relationships. We can try and build it on our career and money. But our fortunes can rise and fall according to our economy. Some feel according to the last election. Our fortunes can rise and fall. We can try to build on our own human strength. Our ability to be righteous. Our ability to have the right answers. Our ability to know what to do. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes we don't have the right answers. Our strength does fail us. We're not righteous in and of ourselves. Even this last week, you can probably think about your life and realize there's so many things I could have done better. So many ways I could have grown. And so our life is not meant to be built on human strength. We can try to build it on the standards of this world, but it doesn't lead to a good place. It has to be built on Jesus. If we build it there, it'll never be put to shame. You know, you can go back to where this book was written, and there are still some things standing that were built in that time. You know, the road system the Romans built is still there. You can still walk on it because that road system was built with stone. You can go to see some buildings still thousands of years old and still standing because it was built on stone. The cornerstone was put right, and therefore it lasted. You see, we build our lives on Jesus as the cornerstone, and it lasts. It lasts to eternity. It lasts forever. It's enduring. You want to have a marriage that lasts, a purpose that lasts, strength that lasts, eternal life that lasts. Build it on the cornerstone. As Greg said last week, you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. He's speaking to a group of people, many of them who are servants and slaves in the Roman Empire. He's speaking to a group of people, many who are poor, many who are disenfranchised, some who are free, some who have the rights of Roman citizens, many who do not. He wants them to know you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you could declare the praises of Him. He wants to know no matter your life situation, you are these things. And it leads us to the topic today, which is the power of a surrendered life. He's going to show, Peter is going to give us some practical input today about what is the power of a surrendered life. And I have to tell you, I believe if you'll listen carefully, you'll understand it doesn't matter your situation. You can live an unbelievable, powerful life. It's very significant, very powerful, a chosen people, somebody who's declaring the praise of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. Please turn over to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. That's where we'll start, or you can just read along with me there on the screen. It says there, "Dear friends," and that's how he felt about them, "I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, those who do not belong to this world, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." Good advice. Sometimes we underestimate what we're involved with. We underestimate the significance of a service like this one. We underestimate what we're facing week to week. That sinful desires and a spiritual force of evil does wage war against your soul. He said, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor, whatever. Read it for yourself. You know, to live this kind of a life, a powerful life, a surrendered life, I want to see three things from the text here. The first is to submit to authority. I know that's just a command that you all love. That's like your favorite topic to talk about in the Bible. Submit to authority, number one. Number two, serve the community. And number three, show God's glory. And so we'll begin with the idea of submit to authority. Listen to what he says here. Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. And so Peter says, submit to how many authorities? Every human authority. Wow! Now, if I was going to pick out your favorite passage in the Bible, and I was going to do a poll this morning, Vote on what subject to preach on. I'm not sure that anybody would vote for submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority. That word submission. Sometimes we're a little like Fonzie. Remember in Happy Days where he'd start to say, I'm sorry? And he'd go, I'm so... He couldn't get the word sorry out. Sometimes we're a little like that with the word submission. Submit. Right. I love that word. Submit. Not really. Yet look what Peter brings this subject up a number of times here in the book of 1 Peter. He says in chapter 2, verse 18, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. That's a tough command, isn't it? Even to those who are harsh. 1 Peter 3:1, wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. Wives, submit to your husband, to the authority that God has given to him. Now, there's a countercultural passage, if you could ever find one. And then finally, 1 Peter chapter 5. In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. This is the way that God intends for people to live. He commands people to live in submission to authority on this earth. That is what He commands. It's a Greek military term meaning to arrange troop divisions in a military fashion under the command of a leader. That's what it means in the Greek language from a military perspective. In a non-military use, it means a voluntary attitude of giving and cooperating, assuming responsibility and carrying a burden. A voluntary attitude of cooperating, assuming responsibility and carrying a burden. Every human authority. That's what he tells us here. So what does that mean? That means at the workplace, be subject to my boss? Yes. Now, to these guys, the slaves, they couldn't get out of this. They couldn't quit. That's just the way it was. There were probably about a third of the Roman Empire had some sort of an indentured servant or slavery kind of thing going. And a lot of times it was because they'd gotten in debt in some way. The harvest hadn't come in. They had borrowed money maybe to plant their crops. In order to satisfy that debt, they would have to give themselves or one of their family members into slavery. So they didn't have the luxury of quitting. Now, I'm sure if you can get out of, there are places in the Bible where a harsh authority, it says, get away from that. Jesus, his parents fled from Nazareth when Herod decided to kill all the children. That was avoiding harsh authority. So if you can get out of harsh authority, there's nothing wrong with that. There are times when we do resist evil authority. And yet in this situation, because they were slaves, they had no ability to do that. And so he gave them the advice that submit even if they're harsh. In our workplace, sometimes you'll have good bosses, and sometimes you won't. That's one of those painful facts of life. I've had some great bosses. Got a great boss now, John Lusk, great boss. Had some great bosses. Probably fired up I said that, aren't you? I've had some great bosses. I've had some lousy bosses. I've had some bosses that didn't pay the bills. When I was in sales, I went out and got all these people to buy stuff. Then they didn't pay the bills. And I'm the guy who's getting all this pressure put on me. That was a lousy day. I had a boss at Frito-Lay that was super harsh. Used to come down, would have these things we're supposed to be giving to our customers. These little prizes in order to get them to promote with us. He'd come down and just take all of them for himself. We'd all be looking, how are we supposed to just be beside ourselves with this breach of integrity? See, I've had some good bosses and I've had some not so good bosses. And yet he says, submit. How about school teachers? It's kind of fashionable for kids to kind of rebel against their school teachers. My sister-in-law is the principal at a pretty tough school over in the Highland area. It's got all the way through 8th grade, kindergarten through 8th grade. Number of gang members in the school. In the school, last week, one of the guys, who she actually likes and has a pretty good relationship with, stole their teacher's wallet. So they're in there, hey, you think you can give this wallet back? And says, well, I don't really have that wallet. And you want to give that wallet back? We said, well, maybe you should go and check the trash over in this part of the, okay, as he gets his wallet back. Sometimes it's kind of a funny thing to not feel like you ought to submit to your school teachers, but it does mean that. If you're on a sports team and the coach, follow his direction. Children with parents, to obey and follow them. Wives with their husbands. Husbands with their wives' needs, to submit to their wives' needs. That's the way the Bible presents it. And finally, in our church community, the leaders of the church. You are intended to submit to the leaders of the church. That is God's intention. That the leaders of the church do have an authority level over the affairs of what goes on inside this holy community. And he says, obey your leaders. Follow them. Submit to their authority. God intends for us to submit ourselves and follow authority. Jesus did it. He followed authority. He said in John 6:38, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." I came to do the Father's will. When he was in the garden, he cried out, "May your will be done. Not my will, but may yours be done." Jesus was a man under authority. This isn't exactly a fun topic. There are several reasons for that. I want you to consider it, why we might bristle a little bit. Right now, you're probably like, oh boy, I'm not so sure I like this one so much. There are some reasons for that. It'd probably be wise to consider it. Our country was formed by rebelling against the English. Therefore, we regard it as a virtue. We celebrate it at holidays. We make movies about it. We don't really celebrate the dutiful citizen who goes to work and pays their taxes. That doesn't get a holiday or a movie. But we do make a movie about walking tall and things like that, where you throw off unjust authority. That is sort of the cultural fabric of our society. It's our ethos. It's our value structure. It's the way we look at things. And therefore, it doesn't feel quite natural all the time to be submitting to authority. So sometimes it's just our culture. Sometimes it's us because we're sort of prideful. Isn't it easy to think you have a better answer? Do you ever listen to talk radio? For all those talk radio fans out there, you certainly could tell from that there are a lot of people who think they have better answers. I've got the silver bullet here that'll solve all these problems. If anybody wouldn't be so stupid and would put this into practice. Really, you're the one guy out there with the silver bullets that can solve all this. That's powerful. But we do kind of feel like, well, if I was in charge, if I was George Karl and running the Nuggets, I know how I'd substitute for the team. If I was, coach of the Broncos, I know what I'd do. If I was the governor, Hickenlooper, I know what I'd do. If I was the president, I know what I'd do. We sort of have that in our mind. If I was the church leader, maybe if I was me, I don't know. We get to thinking in our own pride, really. We don't realize always that it's easier to see a problem than to fix a problem. And so, in our own pride, sometimes we're self-centered, honestly. Sometimes we only think of things in our own terms, how it's affecting me, how it's making me feel, what I want. We're not able to see it in a wider perspective. Then other times, sometimes that we have this response to authority, it's because we have seen authority abused or mishandled. Now, authority in and of itself is a good thing. Try to think for yourself all the things that would not be possible without authority. It would not be possible to have law and order without authority. Having been a person who got mugged once in Boston, I know what it feels like, to have a crime perpetrated against you, and I know how excited I would have been to see a police officer rolling around the corner right about that moment. I would have been, "You were my man, come on over here." There's no law and authority, no order and law without it. It's impossible to have leadership without it. You think about all the things that go well because of good leadership. Wouldn't be possible without some level of authority. It's impossible to have instruction and training without it. How do you learn? How are you trained? How do you grow without authority? And it's impossible to have justice without authority. And that's what he says here. He's saying that the governor's been sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Somebody has to have the authority and the power to make sure that justice is done. And if you've ever been, illegally handled, you understand how much you appreciate that, to be able to call the police, to have a legal system like what we have and a Bill of Rights and things of that nature. And so authority is a good thing. But sometimes authority is abused. And that leaves in its wake a great difficulty. Maybe you had parents that were neglectful. Maybe you had a dad that just wasn't around much. And therefore you came to view authority as neglectful. Maybe your father or your mother was angry or harsh or an alcoholic, were non-dependable. And therefore you came to view authority that way. Maybe you had a boss that was incompetent and unfair and a poor manager. And you came to view all bosses as being incompetent and unfair. Maybe you had a minister or an elder who broke your trust. You put your hope in him or her, and they broke your trust. And it hurt you greatly. I talked to a young man this last week who while he was in high school, playing in the worship band, going every week, meeting with the minister every week, until one week the minister sat down and said, I've got a terrible thing to tell you. I've had sex with one of the kids coming to the group. And that's the last time this young man ever put his trust in spiritual things again. Maybe you've had a minister that broke trust. Maybe you've had a spouse that you put your hope in, but they left you or they hurt you. And so we come to view authority as something that's negative. And we struggle in our heart when we hear this command, submit to every authority for the Lord's sake. Do it for the Lord. And that's really what it's all about. But God does command us to learn how to submit to authority. And it's a good thing. And it'll be a blessing. It'll be a blessing to you. So I would ask you this morning, as you're considering this topic, how hard is it really for you to submit to authority? Do a heart check. On a scale of 1 to 10, how negative do I feel on the inside about my boss or whatever on it goes? How critical do I feel? How hard is it for me to be honest and real? How hard is it for me to accept advice or to seek advice? How hard is it to allow others to lead? How supportive am I? How loyal am I? And ultimately, when it really comes down to, where is kind of my humility / pride in all of this? Because that's really what this boils down to. It's kind of a function of pride, of really wanting to be first and wanting to know best and not wanting to trust. We live in a culture where this advice is not really valued, but it's greatly blessed. Greatly blessed. If we're like this, it pleases God. That's what he says here, for the Lord's sake. It's like Jesus. God will work through it. He'll help you and strengthen you and guide you. And he needed to tell these people, who many of them were in a difficult circumstance, that this is the way you're meant to live. Submit to every authority. What is the power of a surrendered life? The first aspect of it is that they learn how to submit to authority. But then number 2, that frees them up. What Peter's really getting at is to go and serve the community. And that's really what he begins to say here. Listen to these passages. If you look back with me on the screen. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. He's saying, you are being accused of doing wrong as Christians. You are being criticized. And in this country, it is becoming progressively more of a secular culture. And therefore, Christians aren't really getting the benefit of the doubt oftentimes. And we see in the media oftentimes kind of accusations. Narrow-minded, bigoted, racist, critical, unloving, unjust, issues dominated. And sometimes, as a religious culture, we are too much that way. But there is kind of this critical, negative viewpoint on Christians. His advice on that is, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. What brings glory to God? Good deeds that Christians do. Look what he says later in the passage. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. What silences critics? Good deeds. The Apostle Peter repeated this phrase over and over again. I'll read it to you. You can go home on your own. Put this in your notes. 1 Peter 3:11 says, they must turn from evil and do good. 1 Peter 3:13, who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? 1 Peter 3:16, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. 1 Peter 3:17, for it is better if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than doing evil. And finally, 1 Peter 4:19, so then those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. Man, it sounds like he really believes in doing good. Do good. There is a command this morning. Do good. Be a person who's devoted to good deeds. You know, that's an inspiring thing. You know, I find it greatly inspiring the way the church put this into practice. And I'm going to stop for a second here and give you a little history lesson. So I'm going to take the preacher hat off, put the teacher hat on, okay? And here's a little historical lesson on how the church chose to obey this. They took this absolutely serious and went out into their community and began to do good. Listen to some of these things. You know, the interesting thing about researching church history is there's lots and lots of historical writings that have been left behind. Roman emperors wrote letters and things, and so you can study what they believed. There were Jewish and Roman historians. They left things behind, and there were writings in the church, and they left it behind. But listen to some of these things. You know, there was a book called The Shepherd of Hermas in the early 100s. Here's what it was about. As early as the 2nd century, Christians were practicing an interesting and very sacrificial form of charity. They would fast from meals so that the unconsumed food and resources could be given to the poor and the hungry. The first mention of this practice that I have found is in the Shepherd of Hermas, having fulfilled what is written. In the day on which you fast, here's what it said, you will taste nothing but bread and water, and having reckoned up the price of the dishes of that day, which you intend to have eaten, you will give it to a widow or an orphan or to some person in want. That was the practice of the church. The Apology of Aristides in 130 AD says this, and if there is among them any that is poor and needy, and if they have no spare food, they fast 2 or 3 days in order to supply to the needy their lack of food. It was the practice of some Christians to fast twice a week and take what they would have consumed and given it to the poor. That's what their practice was. It is estimated in Rome in the year 250, there were 10,000 Christians obliged to fast for the poor. It is suggested there that they could generate from that group of 10,000 1 million rations a year through fasting. And that is what they did. That was their commitment to doing good. And that served as a tremendous contrast between the pagan world and the Christian faith. In fact, Plato said, and speaking of the Roman position on this in the Plato's Republic, which many of us read in college, it states there, a poor man who was no longer able to work because of his sickness should be left to die. The Roman philosopher Plautus stated, you do a beggar bad service by giving him food and drink. You lose what you give and prolong his life from misery. As a result, this great contrast developed between the church and the Christian faith, between the Christian faith and the pagan world. Lucian, a Roman writer, stated this, the earnestness with which the people of this religion help one another in their needs is incredible. They spare themselves nothing for this end. Their first lawgiver put it into their heads that they were all brethren. That is as they observed the behavior of the Christians. The Roman Emperor Julian, in the 4th century, decided that the Christian church was winning way too many pagan converts. And so he was going to revive the pagan faith. The pagan faith was dying because of the influence of the Christians. And so he made this statement. The impious Galileans relieve both their own poor and ours. It is shameful that ours should be so destitute of our assistance. Julian especially admired the letters of bishops wrote to commend poor travelers to the care of other Christians. And then in an attempt to emulate the Christian church, Julian attempted to impose a high sense of moral behavior on his priests, pagan priests, and attempted to copy aspects of Christian charity. This was the moral climate in which Christianity taught that mercy is one of the primary virtues. That a merciful God requires humans to be merciful. Moreover, the corollary that because God loves humanity, Christians may not please God unless they love one another was something entirely new. Perhaps even more revolutionary was the principle that Christian love and charity must extend beyond the boundaries of family and tribe, that it must extend to all those who in every place call on the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Indeed, love and charity must even extend beyond the Christian community. This was revolutionary stuff. Indeed, it was a cultural basis for the revitalization of a Roman world groaning under the host of miseries. They changed their whole world by doing good. They just obeyed this command. I'll go out and I will do good. I'll fast for widows and orphans and the poor people. I'll give to them. I'll serve them. As a result of that, the legacy of the Christian faith has been one of serving the less fortunate and serving the poor. Thomas of Villanueva, a Spaniard ordained as a priest in 1519, a primary focus of his ministry was to find homes for orphans and providing for their pressing material needs. Andrew Geddes, a Scottish Protestant, he conducted a ministry to provide for abandoned and orphaned children throughout Scotland. Camillus de Laius, a former soldier who converted to Catholicism, he became the leader of the hospital of San Giacomo in Rome. He trained Christian workers to care for the sick and deal with the problems of the poor, the homeless, and the abandoned. And finally, Francis de Girolamo, he ministered in Naples, Italy. Girolamo rescued hundreds of children from deplorable conditions. He also opened a thrift shop to provide for the poor, several almshouses, and a founding hospital. That has been the legacy of the Christian faith. It has been singular and unique in that it changed the ethos of the world. Here were these poor, destitute, enslaved people. That the Apostle Peter is saying, no, you can live the power of a surrendered life. You can change the whole world. Surrender to me. Do it my way. Go out and start doing good. Do good. Go out and serve your community. Care what happens to people. And it will change the world. How about you and me? How much good are you committed to doing? How much have you devoted yourself to really going out in the community as a loving Christian influence and doing good? You know, I really wonder about that. He starts off this passage by saying, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires. Those sinful desires include self-centeredness, which I believe many of us are guilty of. It includes materialism, which I believe many devote our lives to. It includes complacency and turning a blind eye to the weak, which I believe many of us are guilty of. You and I have got to challenge ourselves to be like these early Christians and obey the command, go and serve your community. Care what happens to them. Care about orphans. Care about sick people. Care about the hurting. Care about the hungry. Care about your neighbors. Get involved. Get to know them. Care what happens. It will change the world. He's speaking to wives who were married to pagan men who are not Christians. He's saying, submit, do what's right. You'll convince them with your heart. He's speaking to slaves whose masters are abusing them. He said, obey, do what's right. Your Christian character will persuade them. You'll win the day. He's speaking to freedmen. If you'll notice in the passage, in the next verse down, live as free people. He's speaking to those who are Roman citizens and free. He says, don't use that freedom to abstain, to get involved in sin. Instead, go out and do good. And they did. He's speaking to the young, telling them, submit and learn, and go out and do good, and you'll change the world. You know, as I was growing up, I was always appreciative of my mother's love for the Bible. And I appreciated how much, my father was a bit of a rascal. He was an awesome guy, great guy, but he had his rough spots. Seeing her humble, submissive spirit towards him, seeing her reading her Bible consistently, convinced me to go read the Bible. I believe I never would have become a Christian or a minister had not my mother had such a great spirit. And that is what he's telling each of us to do. Find ways to do good. You know, the staff at the beginning of this next year is going to read the book, The Hole in Our Gospel. because we are serious about growing in this. We're going to do that together. We're going to form a service team here in the Northwest region that's seeking to address this. If you'd like to join that, please let Suzanne or myself or one of the elders or their wives know. But we are going to find ways to do good to the poor, to the hurting, to the struggling. I would urge you to do random acts of kindness, to respond well to the unfairness and the difficulties of your life. And God will so bless you. And finally, the final point is show God's glory. And that is what He does. Let's look what He says here. That they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. They will look at your life and they will say, I'm going to glorify God. That person loves God. That's what Jesus was like. That's what the Lord must be like. You know, I heard an illustration of when the U.S. soldiers in World War II were liberating France. They liberated a French town, and as they were leaving town, one of the soldiers noticed that a French bakery was still open. And so he looked inside, and he said, you know, that French pastries look great. And so he stopped for a second, and he went into the bakery, and he bought himself some pastries. And as he turned around, he saw this little French kid with his face pressed up against the glass, staring at him, buying these pastries. A number of the French children were orphans because of the occupation of the Nazi army. And so this little kid looked like an orphan. He was poorly dressed. And the soldier looked at him. And he went outside. And he kneeled down and he gave him his pastries. And he says, kind of patted him on the back. And as he got up to leave, the little kid pulled on his shirt coat, on his coat there. And he turned around and he asked him a question. He said, Mister, are you God? Are you God? The reason he asked him that is because his parents had repeatedly told him, God is going to deliver us. God will save us. And so he said, are you God? And that is what people will see in you and me. They will say, I see God in you. I see God in you. You will show people God's glory if we choose to obey this. You see, in this place, slaves, wives, freedmen, the young, the old, they all declared God's glory. I would challenge each one of us to live a surrendered life. A surrendered life that will make great impact. There is a power to it. To close, I want to read the words of a guy named George Liddell as he speaks of the power of one solitary life. Give me a man of God, one man whose faith is master of his mind, and I'll right all wrongs and bless the name of all mankind. Give me a man of God, one man whose tongue is touched with heaven's fire, and I will flame the darkest hearts with high resolve and clean desire. Give me a man of God, one man, one mighty prophet of the Lord, and I will give you peace on earth, bought with a prayer and not a sword. Give me a man of God, one man, true to the vision that he sees, and I will build your broken shrines and bring the nation to their knees. Give me one man who lives a surrendered life, a man who submits to authority, serves his community, and shows God's glory. God bless you.